Well, as a child, I loved magic. That's the talk. The rest is all footnotes. And for a child of my generation, magicians were everywhere. Bozo Circus, Ed Sullivan, and children's birthday parties. My parents hired a magician to perform at my 4th birthday party. The blindfolded boy is my neighbor, Johnny Ford, whose hand would miraculously not be severed by the chopping block you see on the table behind him, even though we had seen with our own eyes a carrot cut in two. This and other tricks in the magician's show left us all gasping. How does he do it? How is it possible? And at the same time, we found not knowing how it's done just as thrilling. Magic and children have a natural affinity because a child already perceives the world to be a pretty magical place. Magic easily evokes their innate curiosity and wonder. The magician momentarily bends reality, bends what is real, what's possible. And tonight is all about the unknown, the mysterious, and how important these are for engaging our beneficial bewilderment. And how the feeling of wonder is actually vital to our being, a kind of soul food that deepens our feeling of connection to life as well as our experience of the sacred. Are you in? Okay. Along the way, I'm going to be having some fun by showing how the timeless archetypes of the tarot correspond with the whole theme of wonder and mystery. Now, you may hear me pronounce tarot as tarot or tarot. Actually, either pronunciation is fine. The only one that is not is tarot. That's what we leave bad vegetables to do. So tarot or tarot. And all the images you'll see are from the deck called the Universal Waite Tarot, named after the deck's creator, Arthur Waite, a scholarly mystic. The original Rider-Waite deck is now 102 years old and is published today by US Game Systems. You're seeing 22 of the 78 cards, which are also featured in my book, Tarot for Life. So the sense of childlike wonder that we're exploring tonight is captured best in this archetype, the Fool. Here we see a youthful figure with arms outstretched to embrace experience. He carries a white rose signifying his innocence and perhaps even an offering to life. The dog symbolizes the fool's instincts, urging him to take a leap into the unknown. The tiny satchel shows he travels light, not carrying the baggage of fixed ideas, opinions, and notions. He is numbered 0. He is the Zen ideal of the beginner's mind, the blank slate. And he is also very much the inner child. And here's a quote I love from the late biologist and conservationist Rachel Carson, who died in 1967. She wrote, "A child's world is fresh and new and beautiful, full of wonder and excitement. It is our misfortune that for most of us, that clear-eyed vision, that true instinct for what is beautiful and awe-inspiring is dimmed and even lost before we reach adulthood." Carson goes on to express a wish that every child have, quote, "a sense of wonder so indestructible that it would last throughout life as an unfailing antidote against the sterile preoccupation with things that are artificial, the alienation from sources of our strength." Now, in Carson's view, I love this, she says that wonder is not a wispy, starry-eyed naivete, but a source of strength. I would add that to wonder is also to appreciate. There can be reverence for the thing we don't understand. Wonder also tends to go hand in hand with humility. When we recognize something is bigger than we are or beyond our comprehension, we're able to empty a little bit more of that bag. And there's nothing more humble than the number 0. Einstein said, "The most beautiful thing that we can experience is the mysterious." It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and true science. Now, I'd like to share with you a very recent experience of the mysterious. Just last month, my sister Jan, who lives in Eugene, Oregon, ended a business that she had run very successfully for 17 years. I found a card, a beautiful note card that I really thought was perfect to write a note in which I would simply congratulate her for her 17 years of success and wish her well on this next new venture that she was starting. The card that I picked from the card shop had no words on it, but it did have a very surreal image. It was an image of a male on top of a roof, and it's either moonlight or very early morning. And he's walking on a tightrope, but he's casting out the tightrope with every step. Kind of like the Fool. It's this beautiful walk of faith. Cast a bit of rope, walk some. Cast a bit of rope, walk some. So I sent this to my sister with a nice note inside and said, you know, here's to a great future and congratulations on what you've accomplished. So about a week later, Jan called to thank me for the card, and she told me that 17 years ago, she had bought herself a card to encourage her own walk of faith into that business. And you might be ahead of me on this one. It was the same card, 17 years later. Now, scientists and statisticians, whose disciplines I do respect, would probably dismiss the significance of this. They'd be able to calculate the probability of my sending the same card and show in their maddening way that its odds of happening were somehow much better than average, you know, and they'd refuse to be impressed. Was this event supernatural? No, I don't think so. The card didn't materialize out of the ether. I bought it in a card shop. I put a stamp on it. I put it through US mail. But for my sister and me, the causal component did not diminish the impact. For us, the coincidence of the card was pure magic. It was an event filled with meaning, a metaphor for her life coming full circle, and a good omen for her business. Carl Jung, our friend Carl Jung, coined the word synchronicity, and he described it as a meaningful coincidence of two or more events where something other than probability or chance is involved. Now, what qualifies as meaningful always depends on the context. A ladybug landing on my wrist is not a remarkable or synchronistic event. It's probably not worthy of awe or wonder, unless I happen to be writing the word ladybug at the moment it lands on my wrist, or I'm getting a phone call from a friend nicknamed Ladybug at that very moment. Or I might be in Antarctica, and where there are no ladybugs, and one lands on my wrist, and then it becomes really extraordinary and something really to wonder about. So the point is that we need some sense of context for something to be truly meaningful and synchronistic. Many years ago, my friend Pat was diagnosed with breast cancer. One day she was sitting at home rather absently watching TV. At one point she asked aloud to the universe, she said, "Will I be all right?" And then she sort of drifted asleep. When she awoke, a doctor on TV was telling a woman with breast cancer the following: "You have clean margins. None of it went into your lymph nodes. You'll have the radiation and you'll be fine." Pat said that she knew that message was for her. A week later, her oncologist gave her a prognosis identical to the one she heard on TV, and she lives today free of cancer. If we passed the mic around, I think that we would probably fill a book with just the stories of the people in this room, because most of us have experienced events that defy probability. Sometimes these occurrences seem rich with personal meaning, as in the examples I shared. They validate our choices, or they open us to the next step in our lives, or even show us the purpose of our lives. And at other times, these events may seem completely pointless. Several years ago, I was driving down a lonely stretch of Indiana highway, and a very unprofound thought occurred to me. I just had the thought of all things, a Mars bar. And, you know, it's a perfectly nice thought to have if you like chocolate, as I do. But within just maybe 20, 30 seconds, across the overpass zooms a truck with the Mars logo on it. And this is way out in nowhere. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I didn't take this message as or if it was a message, I didn't go and get a Mars bar. I really let it lie. I didn't interpret it esoterically. I didn't think that, oh, Mars, oh, God of Mars, aggression, warlike, drive more aggressively. I mean, I didn't make any of these connections. It was really just amusing and fun. Maybe just a comical elbowing from the quantum field. And it interrupted the monotony of the drive. If you've ever driven through Indiana, you know how welcome that is. And it got me thinking that maybe interruption is the true purpose of these less meaningful sorts of synchronistic events. They interrupt the routine. They make us mindful of the moment. And at best, they arouse our curiosity and even our humor. Maybe somewhere there are trickster gods who are racking up points every time one of us says, "How funny is that? How odd? What's that mean?" Now, no matter what we conclude about our serendipities and synchronicities, they invite us to savor, if even for just a moment, the pleasure of mystery. So here's the tarot archetype for mystery. She's the high priestess. She sits between two pillars whose letters stand for Boaz and Joachim. Those are the names of the pillars at the entrances of the mystical Temple of Solomon. These pillars were said to contain the secrets of the universe. And it's worth pointing out that the words secret and sacred have the same root origin. The high priestess is the keeper of life's secrets. She knows the meaning of each coincidence, the secret of every magic trick. She knows how the ancients moved the rocks of Stonehenge, and she knows where we've misplaced the TV remote. This is a very useful energy. The high priestess contains the secrets of the universe, and just as intriguing, the secrets of our own inner universe, the inner life, the unconscious mind. She symbolizes the unexplored parts of our psyche and all the potential therein. Virginia Woolf wrote a poem, and this excerpt from it, I think, really gets to exactly what this archetype is about. Virginia Woolf wrote, "There is a virgin forest in each, a snowfield where even the print of birds' feet is unknown." That is high priestess. For Carl Jung, the unconscious mind was a vast unknown. In his lectures, he would illustrate the difference between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. He'd take a piece of paper and crumple it up, toss it in the center of the lecture room, and he would say, "That is the conscious mind. Everything in the lecture room and beyond is the unconscious." So it gave the students a very vivid illustration of how tiny the conscious mind is in relation to the unconscious. In the tarot, the high priestess offers a way in to untapped inner wisdom and richness. She is that ineffable inner knowing. We can't think our way to this kind of knowing. We have to receive it. We receive it through dreams, through intuition, through music, poetry, through revelation. The mystical core of the Torah is Kabbalah, which means to receive. You can probably see in her hands there, she's got a partially concealed document, which is the Torah. It's also an anagram for tarot. But the idea here is that there's something pretty profound and in the way of wisdom. And again, we cannot simply read about it. We have to come to the place where we just become porous enough to receive it. The high priestess, like all of the archetypes, is not just a lofty ideal. We express this archetype when we feel a quiet inner knowing without knowing how we know. My sister couldn't prove that the card she received was a cosmic validation, just as my friend Pat couldn't prove the TV doctor was a message intended for her. They just knew. Aside from being synchronistic, both of their stories are examples of what the classical period called omnia oblativa, not to be confused with the Beatles' Obla-di, Obla-da. Omnia oblativa are oracles or messages that occur naturally, spontaneously, without our seeking them. Its counterpart is omnia impetrativa, which are oracles that we engage through tools such as the tarot and I Ching and runestones. Now, what tarot and I Ching and runestones have in common is randomness. Before we ask a question, we shuffle them, we shuffle the cards, or we throw the runestones, and we allow them to organize in whatever way they might. By leaving the order to chance, we remove the element of conscious selection. And these objects, then, if you've ever worked with any of these tools, have a way of organizing or arranging in ways that are relevant to the context of the question or the issue. And here's just a quick example I want to share from a tarot reading I once gave a client, a woman in her mid-50s. At the start of the reading, I asked the cards, what is her central challenge right now? I invited the client to pull one card out of the deck in answer to that, what is your central challenge? We turned the card over, and it was the Hanged Man. Now, the card has some very inspiring spiritual meanings, and also some very mundane ones. And the mundane ones tend to relate to being hung up, literally, being hung up, being delayed. It can also speak to feeling like a sacrificial lamb, like you're the one who's held up as an example. Now, the woman told me that 2 years earlier, she'd been fired from her government agency job for being a whistleblower. And that had stained her reputation, and she'd been unable to find work for 2 years because of that. So she completely related to the hangman and everything about it, the long delay, the hanging out without a job, the sacrificial lamb, a martyr for truth. She even saw that structure as a T for truth, and that halo of integrity, that even though she had suffered, she did it with integrity, and she would not have changed her mind. So this image, this archetype, was very, very relevant for her. And I suspect that if she had dreamed of the image, it would not be any less relevant. That's just such a strong image to pull out that from a person. So here's the question. Why did this card show up out of 78 cards? And why did it correspond so beautifully to her central issue? Why does a book fall open to the exact page that we needed? Why would an old friend call us at the moment we just started thinking about him or her? Well, we could say, oh, it's synchronicity. But the problem is that the synchronicity doesn't answer the question, who or what is orchestrating this correspondence? What's determining where these cards or runestones fall? The astrophysicist, let's bump it up a bit here, Arthur Eddington may have the answer. He said, and I quote, "Something we don't know is doing we don't know what." In other words, it's a mystery, and a particularly humbling one. We may call this mystery life, God, inner wisdom, the universe, the quantum field, the divine, the higher self, or a cosmic or unconscious force. Let's get back to our trumps. Just as many Hindu gods are all aspects of the one supreme being, the 22 tarot archetypes symbolize aspects of the same singular creative intelligence. We might assign that singular role to the tarot trump that is number 1, the magician. The magician represents both the divine creative intelligence and our own. His upward and downward pointing hands suggest the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. Our spirit is connected with the universal spirit, to the one spirit. The infinity symbol mirrors that boundlessness. So as a symbol of that which we call God, The magician uses divine sleight of hand to rearrange our perception of reality that leaves us gasping, like my friends and me at the magic show. How does he do it? How is this possible? Tarot begins, if we go back one more here, with the magician. The fool, by the way, numbered 0, is free to move as he pleases. It's sort of an unstructured concept, so it doesn't belong in the structure, at least not in terms of the numbers. But it starts with the magician, which is the microcosm, the singular focus. And it ends with the world, which is the macrocosm. Here's the world. Jung called this the unus mundus, the one world, the unified world. I love this quote from Hippocrates, and I don't know many, but this one I like. There is one common flow, one common breathing. All things are in sympathy. The whole organism and each one of its parts are working in conjunction for the same purpose. The world card is about that kind of unity, that everything is connected in ways that currently quantum physics is very close to figuring out how. Because we've been using that as a platitude for a long time. You know, we're all one, everything's connected. But quantum physics is actually being able to show through dizzying principles how that really is so. So here's the world card. And the world is really, it's everything. It's our connection with plant life, with animal life, with loved ones. We're seeing human and animal figures. This is about things just truly coming full circle. Our experience of being fully at home on the planet, fully at home in our being. Let's talk a little bit more about quantum physics, because it's very exciting and it has everything to do with synchronicity and everything to do with wonder. In the 1990s, the US military conducted a series of experiments. I can see some of you getting worried already. And this is a very good one. This is a very exciting one. The researchers took cells for DNA from donors, and they put the cells in a room near the donors. The donors were shown videos designed to elicit intense emotions. And they monitored the donors for those emotions, and they also monitored the DNA. And what they found is that with every up and down, every hill and valley, every spike that the donor felt, the exact same electrical charge was showing up in the DNA in the other room. And there was no lag time. It would happen instantaneously. So they thought, well, what will happen if we put this a few miles away? We put the DNA a few miles away, and there was no change. The military stopped the experiment at 50 miles. At 50 miles, the DNA was still jumping and responding in real time with the human being's response to the emotional videos, the emotional content. Author Greg Braden, if you've never read his stuff, he makes physics, quantum physics, accessible. He says this example shows the power of non-local energy. Cells communicating through an energy that is not affected by time and distance. This phenomenon is at the heart of quantum physics. And it really is bridging the gap between what we've called spirituality and science. Non-local energy may be the active principle behind synchronicity in oracles. Something seemingly disconnected and external to us is in sync with us, is being mirrored back to us, is being mirrored back to us. In her book, The Dove and the Stone, Alice O'Howell says, there is an inner beauty in each of us, hungering to be matched in outer experience. On this topic of matching and mirroring, I'd like to share a personal story I wrote about in Tarot for Life. I had a dream several years ago that there was a cricket in my bed, and I stood at the side of the bed looking at the cricket, unable to decide if I should gather up the sheets and safely put the cricket outside, or if I should squash and kill the cricket. Both seemed like viable options in the dream. And when I woke up, I was very disturbed by this. I thought, how could I have so casually thought about killing a harmless cricket? And it bothered me. And I got up, I went to the bathroom, and on my way into the bathroom, on the floor was a dead cricket. Now this is in March. I have never seen a cricket in my apartment, let alone in March. I've never seen them even in summer when the evenings sing with crickets. So this stood out. And it made me very sad because I felt like this was clearly a symbol that was very personal and very pointed. I pulled out my tarot cards later that day, and I asked the question, the only question that occurred to me, which is, what part of me does the cricket represent? And it showed me the Fool. Here was the follower of instinct, the taker of great leaps of faith. And I made the connection. What do the Fool and cricket have in common if not their impulses to leap? The neglected fool, like the dead cricket, told me I was killing my own impulses for change through chronically safe, uninspired choices. Although at that moment I had no clear idea how or where to leap, I felt gratitude for the message itself, for its eloquence, for its healing intent, which began to stir up the very vitality that I had been lacking. The mystery had actually rejuvenated me in that way. I resolved never to let my fool energy get stuck again. Now, I wish I could say that was always the case. No, I've gotten stuck many times since. But this still stands out as a remarkable example of the confluence of what is external to us and what is internal coming together to send a message, an unmistakable one. Cultivating wonder. I think it's important to actually do stuff that enables us to feel that beautiful childlike sense of wonder that the Fool embodies. And I've got 9. I came up with 9 different ways. There's many more, but I didn't want the evening to go on forever. So the first one is for cultivating a sense of true appreciation and wonder and awe is to start with the natural world. Nature is wondrous. We don't need magic shows, we don't need synchronicities, we don't need unexplainable events to feel awe. We can just look around. Meister Eckhart said that existence itself is reason for wonder. Earlier tonight I quoted Rachel Carson. As a marine biologist, her path to awakening the spirit was through the natural world. She would have been wonderstruck to get the news that you might have read about it. Tomorrow is the publication of the Census of Marine Life. And it's the most ambitious scientific survey ever done. In the last 10 years, scientists from around the world have been creating a catalog of all the species of plants and animals in the oceans. In 10 years, they've identified more than 6,000 new species. And here's the thing. They estimate that there may be another 750,000 more species awaiting discovery. Carl Sagan said, quote, "How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded, this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by the conventional faiths." End quote. Second idea, read about quantum physics. It will rearrange your perceptions. Again, I mentioned Greg Braden, and he's a great entry point if you're interested, because he does make it accessible. Number 3, don't write off everything as a coincidence. Allow for the possibility of meaning and message. There's an old joke about the guy who's got a terribly important job interview in New York City, and he cannot find a parking spot, and he's been driving around for blocks and blocks and blocks, and nothing is showing up. Finally, he throws his hands up, he said, "God, if you get me a parking spot, I promise, I will stop drinking and I will go to church every Sunday." Well, just like that, parking spot shows up, he goes into it. He looks up and says, "Never mind, I found one." So don't write everything off as a coincidence. Conversely, don't assume that everything is meaningful. Not everything is significant. As Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, instead of reading into everything. I had a friend who's very new agey, love her a lot, and I casually mentioned that I was going to be driving to the East Coast for the holidays. And she kind of looked at me sagely and knowingly. She says, "Oh, yes, the East, it's very healing." You know? Now, you know, I thought, well, okay, I didn't know what to do with that, but I kind of thought, this is meaningful for her. You know, I did wonder, though, what about the other directions? Are they, you know, completely out of it when it comes to healing? But, you know, we can become neurotic when we start to see signs in things that may not be signs. It's part of our narcissism, I think, that we really want everything in life to be pointing to us, when in fact it may not be. So if we can balance those things, seeing meaning in things, and also having the mindfulness to know when it's just a thing, it's really not a message. Here's another one. Visit the website understandinguncertainty.org. This was a fun find. It's affiliated with the Statistical Laboratory in the University of Cambridge in England. And what you'll find are hundreds and hundreds of anecdotes submitted by people of synchronistic events. And it runs the gamut. It is so much fun. And I submit that if you read just 2, you'll read 20, and that your sense of enjoyment and curiosity about life will be tapped like that, just by reading about what people in their ordinary lives encounter and how these meaningful events spark something. They reconnect us to that wonder and vitality, that inner child. Here's a good one, number 5. Avoid calling if you can say it, avoid calling synchronistic events creepy, weird, or scary. I hear this a lot. People will share an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous account of this, you know, of things coming together in this beautiful synchronicity, or you know, their loved one loved a particular bird, and that bird shows up on their windowsill, chirping at them on the anniversary of the death. I mean, these things happen frequently, and they're creeped out by it, and they're frightened by it. And what I try to do is just encourage them to substitute the word beautiful, or it's curious at the very least, or interesting, but not scary, not weird, not creepy. I think in a way that sort of sends a message that we're not open to those experiences if we label them in such ways. Now, that's not to say that eerie things don't happen. There's a story among many in this website, understandinguncertainty.org, where mother and daughter are in a public library in England, and they're looking through books, and out of one book falls a little piece of paper, and the daughter picks it up. She says it has a name. It says Elliot Ward. Well, Elliot Ward doesn't think anything. They put it back in the book. Next day, the mother slips on the ice and breaks her femur, and she has to be admitted to emergency surgery. And in her recovery room that she was assigned was Elliot Ward. Elliot Ward. This is a ward system in England. And that's eerie. You know, and why? Again, it's just very curious. It's an interruption, a curious interruption. Number 6, study the symbolic world. Pay attention to your dreams. Good place to start. Learn the tarot. Come to my workshop on Saturday. The symbolic world is a way to develop a language that actually makes this communication that I've been talking about tonight easier, more accessible. It's really a way to say to the universe, I'm listening. And just one of many ways. Number 8, let go of seeing yourself as a fixed or finished person. Again, the quote from Virginia Woolf, there is a virgin forest in each, a snowfield where even the print of birds' feet is unknown. And if we can live in that, we're more open to awe. The 750,000 species still awaiting discovery in the oceans is a fitting metaphor for the undiscovered content swimming in the depths of our own unconscious. And we ourselves are made of 60% water. The high priestess, there's a body of water. You can barely see it, but there is one behind her. It's behind that curtain and behind the pillars. And that, as in the tarot, as in every esoteric system, represents the inner depths, the great mystery, spirit. And the last, simply embrace mystery. Take it in. Take it in. Wonderment is soul food. On that note, I'd like to share with you, in closing, a final story, followed by a short poem. Many years ago, I think we need a visual here just to tip it off. Many years ago, it was the early 80s, one of my first jobs was Santa Claus at Carson's. I got to be the big fella, along with about 4 other guys. And we traded off shifts, and it was an absolutely wonderful way to work through Christmas. And the guy who hired me, his name was Harold. Harold told me a story that I have been telling ever since. And Harold was the head of special events. And he said that the year before I was employed there, it was a Saturday morning, he got a phone call from one of his Santas who said he couldn't do the shift that day because he was sick. Now, this is about a week before Christmas. So Harold called the standby Santas. He called the other guys on the list, and nobody could do it. So Harold realized he was going to have to be Santa Claus. He lived in Evanston. So he quickly got dressed. He got on the train. And, oh my gosh, all this going through his head. And about 5 or 6 stops later, a family of 4 get on the train. It's a mom, dad, and 2 little boys, about 4 and 5. And they sit right behind him. And what do they say? But the mom says, okay, so we're going to see Santa at Carson's today. What are you going to tell him you want for Christmas? So Harold, being a smart guy, started to pay very close attention. I don't know if he actually took notes or simply, sponged it in. But the parents rehearsed the boys about what they were going to ask Santa, and Harold took careful note. And then, when the boys were done, Mom and Dad, who were back to back, right behind Harold, started talking very, very quietly and casually about their holiday plans. The husband saying, oh, you know what? I've got to make that peanut butter pie for your sister. She'll kill me if I don't bring that for Christmas Eve. And then the mom's saying, what do we get for Mom? She likes that Kachina doll. What about Southwest Magazine? So all this little chit-chat, and Harold took that in as well. He cannot wait to get to Carson Perry Scott. Train pulls up into Jackson. He gets off, runs in, gets on the Santa outfit and the beard, the whole thing, and he gets, at that point, it was on the stage in the auditorium. A big deal. You had to go through a winding display of animated figures and things like that. So there he's ready to be Santa. The doors to Santa Land open, and there's a huge line of people. It is the Saturday before Christmas. And he sees, way in the back, the family of 4. Oh, he cannot wait. So, as the line gets closer and closer and closer, and the family comes forward, they're next, he calls them over by name. He doesn't ask what the boys want for Christmas. No, 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 no. He tells them, right down to the brand names and the colors. Now, the boys are of the age where they expect Santa to know this. They're awed, to be sure, but they're kind of like, yeah, that's Santa Claus. He knows what we want. But see, the parents had no such expectations. And Harold said that the father couldn't speak. He was looking at his wife, pantomiming, did you? Do you know? And the wife was... And so then he starts in on them. He says, well, I'm sure your mother would love the Kachina doll, and the subscription to Southwest Magazine would be a fine idea. And don't you forget that peanut butter pie. Now, the father is just laughing. That's all he can do. There are no words. He's just collapsed in laughter. And the mother is quite moist-eyed at this point. And she's seeing the huge line waiting. She walks up to Harold, puts her hand on his cheek, and says, thank you. That was beautiful. And then they walked away. And Harold said, he asked his staff afterward, he said, did anyone ask to see who I was? Anyone ask about the identity of Santa? The staff said no, they were never approached. Nobody asked. So here's a family that was content to walk away in wonder, to not know. And I like to think that this is their Christmas story every year. So now the promised short poem. It's by Walt Whitman, Walt Whitman. It's called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick. Till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Brilliant. And I'm sure there will be some questions if you're willing to entertain us.
Happy to,
further.
sure.
Anybody with a first question? Or are we all speechless?
They're awestruck, right?
Awestruck.
Wonderstruck.
Here is one brave soul.
Paul, how did you come to tarot?
A lifelong interest in the wondrous, the mysterious, the unexplained, and the good fortune of having some experiences as a young child, as many young kids do, of some other reality, some other presence, a spiritual dimension that never quite got conditioned out. And thanks to my wonderful parents, who themselves are seekers, who themselves are, I mean, they introduced me to the Theosophical Society, so they're not your typical suburbanites. And, anyway, and I grew up in the suburbs, not to put down the suburbs. Disclaimer. No, but I wanted to learn a language that would use my skills, communication. And I couldn't decide between French and Spanish. And at the Omega Institute, where I was going to study either French or Spanish, I saw that a tarot course was being offered. And just like that, I thought, that's the language. I had been thinking of languages, but this occurred to me rather instantly as the one I wanted to learn, which was purely intuitive, purely a fool's move. I couldn't explain it very well to others, but I don't regret it.
Do you have any touchstones to tell you when you're over-intellectualizing a reading versus using your intuition?
Mm-hmm. Strain. Yeah, and it's usually, if the brow furrows, that's usually an indication that it's too much work. Okay. And the Fool is such a great teacher, because the Fool, and in my classes I work with the Fool as the antidote to overthinking, because the Fool is about trust and dancing and being very childlike and blurting too, lots of blurting without thinking what you're going to say. And oftentimes that's where we hit the truth, is when it just sort of happens. We let it happen. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Any questions from online? We don't have the...
It sounds so godlike. Any questions from online?
Yes. Yes, there is a question. Anyone else with a question while we're waiting? Yes?
Well, what if you're already open to synchronicity and the wonderment of life and have never really dealt with or are really familiar with tarot? How is that going to augment or add to, how important is it to integrate that into your life?
How important is it to integrate something like tarot into your life?
Yeah, to maybe add to your already
Oh,
available.
I would say it's not a matter of it being important. If you are already feeling nicely in sync with life, this is just one of many tools. This is by no means an accelerated way into the feeling of the sacred or connection. It's one tool. It's just one tool. So if whatever's working for you, I mean, absolutely, stick with it. The tarot is nice because it's a system. It's a system of symbols that trigger different states of awareness and consciousness if we work with them in that way. Or we can simply use them for readings and get interesting guidance. But no, it's not important. In the spirit of the Fool again, is it important? No. Is it useful? Yes.
Okay, that's it. Is it useful?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say I have found it to be useful. And just one of many tools.
I've read where Carl Jung used astrology in helping to diagnose his patients. Did he ever use tarot?
He didn't. He didn't use the tarot, but he was very aware of the tarot, and he had written about, he references the tarot. He doesn't write at all at length about it, but he acknowledges it as a very useful system of archetypes. He's being that he was Mr. Archetype, he certainly saw that in the tarot. He saw those correspondences and the value of that. Alice O'Howell, by the way, who I quoted earlier, if you're interested in Jung and astrology, Alice O'Howell was a Jungian, is a Jungian, she's still with us, and her books are terrific, The Dove and the Stone being among them, but she integrates astrology and mythology and goddess mythology in her work, and it's very compelling. Yeah.
Any last question? Yes?
Is there any deck you would recommend? I know there's circular ones. There's the typical ones.
Yeah. Well, there are hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of decks. 1900. Oh, really? Wow. Janet has 1,900 decks. Over 1,900. And we thought the sea life was impressive. Wow. Yeah. Well, you might talk to Janet after this is over. She could probably steer you in the right direction. And the thing is that there's no one correct deck. It's what you respond to and what you really resonate with. But I will say that this deck, the Rider-Waite Tarot and its variations, is very rich in symbolism. It won't steer you wrong. It's got a lot. Each card, you can kind of fall into the card. There are so many different aspects that are represented in these symbols. There's also a Hello Kitty Tarot, no kidding. There are novelty decks that don't boast, they don't pretend to be deep, but there's something for everybody.